Alright, let's go ahead and talk about Sofia Coppola's next movie, which is On the Rocks, which is her reuniting with Bill Murray, which is really great because it's one of those cases where obviously Murray loved working with her on Lost in Translation, but it's one of those cases where usually when Murray's in a movie, even though he's like usually like raising it to another level, especially if it sucks, there's an awful lot of movies that he could have the opportunity to phone it in or whatever. But and not even cases where he's like a supporting character, but like even a leading character, like Rock the Casbah comes to mind. Something that I saw in theaters, I have no recollection of. Um, but here you can tell that there's like a confidence you can go into with it because you know how much he is happy to be here because of how much he loved working with Coppola. Kind of in the same way that he said that he will always say yes to Wes Anderson, like without even a script. And you get the script that you get the idea that he's just as happy on a Coppola set as he might be a Wes Anderson set. And that comes through, especially in this character, quite a bit. But this character is kind of a side character for a while because our main character is Rashida Jones, and we're focused on her marriage to Marlon Wayans. And the thing here is that, as far as like story goes, because I was thinking when you look at kind of a movie like this, and that it's a Coppola movie, and while she has done some movies that you could say are focused on like their story and where it's headed, like when she did the Beguiled remake recently, um, I do think she seems to have much more of a grasp on things when it's just kind of flowing through, sort of like I sort of expected this to kind of be in a similar style as Somewhere, um, but it's actually kind of plot driven, and which was kind of surprising because it kind of just starts headed in that direction where we see them get married and then we cut ahead and they have children and they're kind of in the kind of like a dry spell in their marriage, and she starts to get under the impression that he might possibly be cheating on her with somebody that he works with, especially since he's a workaholic that's constantly gone. And I kind of thought this was just going to be like a side thing, sort of like when Ed Helms thinks that Judy Greer's cheating on him and Jeffy lives at home, and there's like that side plot where he and Jason Segel spy on her. It's basically that, only it's kind of the plot of the movie as opposed to like when it first started. I was like, oh, I kind of thought that was going to be a thing where she would just find out that he was cheating on her or something, and then she and Bill Murray would go on an adventure or something. That's pretty much what I thought it would be, but they actually kind of keep it from us. Like it's kind of they don't really confirm one way or the other if he's cheating at the start, and it's like I thought that was interesting that they would just kind of keep that like we kind of have the uncertainty from her perspective, and I was like, oh, that's interesting as a side thing. But no, that's what like the whole movie ends up being, and I don't know if that is a strength exactly. Um, as I say, when you see the way that she interacts with Murray, just kind of them flowing from one scene to the next, sort of like what Lost in Translation felt like. It's I feel like there would have maybe been a bit more of a strength, but here it seems very almost confined, especially since it doesn't really have like the. I mean, there's plenty of cases where it almost feels like it almost has kind of a European vibe to it, um, where like it's you almost kind of forget sometimes that it takes place in New York, at least most of the time. But it seems to be lacking her like usual cinematic qualities. And I get the idea that it's supposed to be kind of a bit more of an intimate thing than something a bit more flashy like Marie Antoinette was or something. But she or the bling ring even. But the thing is that I feel like she has shown that she can do intimate and kind of feel big and cinematic at the same time. Like there's something about Somewhere to me because I honestly couldn't stand Somewhere the first time I saw it, but then like 3 years later I realized I would still occasionally think about it, so I watched it again and it's like okay, I see what's going on now. Um, Even that, as simple as that was, still felt like I don't know if it's because like Somewhere is basically just symbolism the movie, and it's easy to see it as like kind of a surface level thing. But then, like I said, the way you can take something really simple but make it feel like cinematic in a way suddenly makes it feel like it kind of shows its layers more. or gives it more room to show its layers more. And this movie doesn't really seem to have a lot of room. It's like really confined in this relatively small runtime, and there's not really a whole lot of places it can go once we kind of get the vibe of who the characters are and how their relationships with each other and how far those go. And then it just kind of starts to go into neutral for a while. And I think that's where it kind of like it'll be the kind of thing where like it's not always engaging. Like I felt like my mind was kind of starting to wander a lot around like nearly the hour mark, and it sort of gets. And I think this is another problem I kind of still have with Somewhere, even if I respect it more now, is that Coppola seems to have sometimes, not often, but sometimes a problem where long after you get the point, it seems like it's still trying to make the point. And I feel like this is one of those, and it gets to the point where like there's a character on the side played by Jenny Slate, who feels like she's practically shown in like almost montage form, like through the whole thing. And her whole purpose is to basically show that Rashida Jones is starting to feel distanced from everything around her. So Jenny Slate's whole role is to basically just talk and talk and talk and talk while Rashida Jones may or may not be listening. And it's and that's pretty much what it is. And you could feel like it almost starts to become filler. Like it's like like the way it ends, you almost think it could go on longer, but when you go back to the middle, you realize it didn't feel like they had enough to sustain the runtime we were already at. So I don't know. I'm just kind of in the middle here, but there are moments where it's we get these really nice scenes like when they get pulled over because Murray's clearly speeding, and the way he just kind of uses his Murray charm to talk his way out of it. Because he knows somebody, like he knows the cop's family, one of the cops' family. And this is where you can kind of get maybe a personal vibe where it's like a woman having a dad that has enough connections to get them out of binds, and it's like, is this some sort of, nod to Francis? But it's where it's like you know the father that has the reputation, and it's clearly the almost like I didn't really get much of a living in the shadow vibe from this movie, but I feel like we were like vaguely in that area in the cop scene where she's trying to put something personal in there. And this also kind of goes into a criticism I've heard quite a bit about Coppola's movies, and I'm sure it's being thrown at this one also. The idea that it rubs some people the wrong way, that it's almost like she's trying to get your average moviegoer to sympathize for like the first world problems of rich people. And I've certainly gotten that vibe in other movies, and I can certainly see why people would feel that way about Coppola's movies, but she's never really because really the thing about it is as far as like just how far your empathy goes, because it's like regardless of the different places people are coming from, and there's certainly been times where I like go after nepotism and stuff like that, where it's like one of the most infuriating things ever at times. But it is a case where it's like we all are coming from different places, and we all have problems that's their severity is based on where we're coming from. Where it's like something that may not seem like a big deal to somebody else, it may be like world ending to somebody. Just depending on how their entire life has been led up to this point, and it may not ever really occur to them inside their area that this is really nothing to the regular person. And it's like if she can get the emotion out there, and it doesn't just feel like your cast of characters is just like spoiled rich people or something, I think there is an emotional core you can reach that people can still empathize with if they can recognize that everybody, and I understand completely where like the difficulty of that would be depending on where you're coming from, to where you might just want to tell the characters in a movie, just shut the fuck up and get over it, you are really not doing that bad. But it's like in this case though, it's like she does seem to be in a really good place. It's like everything has fallen into place except for the marriage, but it's like that doesn't necessarily take away from the fact of the tragedy in a person's life, the personal tragedy that a marriage might be failing. And it's like there's got to be some bit of empathy that anybody could see in that is at least had relationship problems, regardless of the rest of the background of the character. Because it's like the whole idea of like people aren't like a lot of people like to use the what's now in GIF form, the scene in Zombieland when Woody Harrelson's wiping his tears with $100 bills in Bill Murray's apartment, no less, or house, no less. But I get that idea, but I do like the idea also of finding the empathy in certain situations and not necessarily always looking at the big picture of where they're coming from, because sometimes a crisis to one person can just be that, without the everything else in your life shouldn't make one problem stop mattering, when it could still be a really heartbreaking thing to the person it's happening to. I think Coppola does find ways to do that, to where it's not really a problem I've ever had with her. But like I said, that's not to say that there aren't other, stories or characters out there that do have that problem, but it's, as far as Coppola goes, it's never really been that much of a problem for me, anyway. Um, but yeah, it does eventually reach, a nice ending, but it does feel like there's sort of something missing. Like I was talking about, like it's almost sort of too tight, but it does keep it from going. Like I feel like if we took it any further, it would just kind of go into contrivance in one way or another. Like I can't even really think of another direction we would go, but it still feels like it ends kind of suddenly, almost like it's wrapped up too easily. But maybe that's just us as jaded moviegoers who have seen too many contrivances to try to drag a story out when it really doesn't have to. So this movie really doesn't have to necessarily go anywhere when we get to that point, and there's really no reason that it can't be solved in as seemingly easy of a way as it is. So that's pretty much where I stand with this. I think if there's another problem I have personally, it might be that I don't know that I don't really have a problem per se with Rashida Jones, but I do think she's probably more suited for like supporting roles as opposed to leading, because I feel like she's kind of, I don't know if bland might be too harsh, but I don't ever find her particularly memorable in leading roles. Like another one that came to mind was Celeste and Jesse Forever, which is a movie that I frequently forget exists, even though once again I saw it in a theater when it came out. But much like Celeste and Jesse Forever, and some vibes I kind of get from this as well, it was like where you are aware of how quietly devastating it's trying to be, but there's kind of a vacancy, at least in me, when watching it, to where it's like I can see exactly the emotional beats you're going for, but I don't really feel any of it. So, um, so I don't know. Once again, I don't know if that's a Rashida Jones thing or just it just happens to be these two movies, but I do think she's much more suited for kind of the supporting players. So yeah, but obviously Murray comes through in this in a way that is real, because Murray does often come through, like we were talking about, even in shitty parts or unmemorable movies or whatever. But like I said, that comfort you get the sense of that he feels with Coppola, where it's almost on par with how he feels about Wes Anderson. That's something's always going to come through with that. So yeah, so I think that's pretty much how I feel about this one. So we're just gonna continue right on with this whole thing, the movie reviews and the Fargos and all that. So until the next thing, I think that's it.